Welcome to your weekly World Climate Change News Report. I'm your anchor, Irene Zielinski. Our first story, January 2020 was the hottest year recorded. According to the European service Copernicus, 2020 began with the warmest month of January ever recorded on the planet. 2019 was the second hottest year on record, and 2020 is already worse, with the Earth's average temperature 0.03 degrees Celsius higher than that of January 2016. Due to climate change, the planet has already heated up at least 1 degree Celsius compared to the pre-industrial era. At this rate, the planet could become 4 to 5 degrees Celsius hotter by the end of the next century. Next, an open letter to the Australian government on climate change. More than 270 scientists signed an open letter to the Australian government, calling for immediate action against climate change and reduction of gas emissions. They warned that the alarming number of bushfires is a clear indication that climate change impacts are stronger, faster, and more extended than previously expected. The scientists call for urgent measures to reduce emissions and build a climate-resilient strategy. Our third story, sustainable aviation in the fight against climate change. John Holland Kay, chief executive of Heathrow Airport, said that aviation needs to be decarbonized and made more sustainable in order to be compatible with humanity's fight against climate change. The UK's aviation industry has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050. Envisioned by industry group Sustainable Aviation, the plan is to make new fuels, cleaner engines, and plant trees. Through these measures, the aviation industry aspires to cut pollution even as the passenger volume is expected to grow by 70%. Our fourth story, EU coal output fell 24% in 2019. Emissions from the power sector fell by a record 120 million tons of CO2 last year, led by a steep decline in coal power generation mostly in Germany, Spain, Netherlands, the UK, and Italy, which was replaced half by natural gas and emits 50% less carbon than coal when burned in power plants, and half by renewables, now responsible for 34.6% of the total electricity generation. The increase in the price of CO2 emissions resulted a good strategy to mitigate climate change. Next up, the Atmosphere Diplomacy Report of the German Foreign Office. Climate change, besides being the greatest challenge at the moment, offers the opportunity for the German Federal Office to help other countries out and organizations in their fight for climate resilience. According to a new report which outlines 6 different challenges of a preventative climate diplomacy. According to the report, the first 2 things to address are the implementation of the Paris Agreement, alongside a climate and implementation of security strategy that takes into account climate change as a threat to peace and stability. In our next story, the United States could be carbon neutral by 2050. The United States can reduce its carbon footprint to 0 by 2050 if the country invests deeply in emerging technologies that draw CO2 out of the atmosphere. According to a report released by the World Resources Institute, the federal funding of a range of carbon removal technologies, amounting to approximately $6 billion per year over the next 10 years, could very well put the United States on a path directly towards carbon neutrality by mid-century. This would be a great success in the fight against climate change. Our next story, climate change refugee ruling made by the UN human rights body. A Kiribati citizen has been successfully awarded refugee status on the grounds of seeking asylum due to the effects of climate change. Kiribati, a country in the central Pacific Ocean, was no longer habitable following a sea level increase, in turn resulting in violent conflicts over land, farming difficulties, and contamination of fresh water. On January 7th of 2020, the UN Human Rights Committee ruled that climate change is indeed a valid reason for seeking asylum, and the recipient countries cannot deport such individuals on these grounds. And now, Indo-Pacific safe havens under imminent risk. International teams of scientists prove that the most biodiverse regions of Earth are among the most vulnerable to climate change. Comparing historic global patterns of unusually extreme climate events, it is undeniable that human-driven climate change is indeed a factor that contributes to erosion of biodiversity. This is particularly dramatic because, according to Dr. Stuart Brown from the University of Adelaide, historically, these regions have provided refuge for species during periods of global warming. Next up, Suriname plans to battle climate change. Countries who signed the Paris Agreement in 2015 were encouraged to set specific goals known as nationally determined contributions to be reviewed this year. Suriname is the second nation to publish their updated NDCs. Although Suriname reports a carbon-negative economy, the country is vulnerable to extreme weather and flooding due to climate change effects. Suriname also aims to focus on increasing electricity from renewable energy sources, developing less damaging farming methods, as well as bringing in stricter controls on vehicle emissions and public transport improvements. And finally, our last story, climate change spreads soil fungus. Researchers from the University of Kassel and Bonn reported that climate change is affecting the health of agricultural soils, resulting in crop failure. Increased heat and droughts boost the growth of pathogenic fungus, Pythum iltonium. It is an aggressive fungus transmitted through the soil that infects the roots, causing it to rot and plant to die. Although some soils have protective mechanisms against such fungi, once infested, the soil is unlikely to recover. This concludes this week's climate change news. Please subscribe for weekly news updates.